It's 1,000 ways to die while you're still breathing. And then one day you look in the mirror, and you don't even recognize who's staring back at you. But every now and then, you get who see themselves in that mirror. They think all that death look good on them. And them's the motherfuckers you gotta fear the most. Cause they dead already.
Sometimes death isn't just physical. You can be alive, but dead inside, killed by the things that happen to you over time. Guilt, being paranoid, regret. It's not just pulling the trigger and getting it over and done with. The damage continues growing until you lose who you were. You lose your innocence, hope, the different person you were trying to be. Some people can't deal with it, just like we saw with Famous. He just wasn't built for the life. They look in the mirror and they like what they see, and they're the ones who are the real threats. They're the ones who you have to fear the most, because they're dead already. They just don't know it. And that's Jukebox in a nutshell after she pulled the trigger and caught her first body in 404. It's the start of her going down a real dark path, when all she was trying to do was be someone different. But episode 4 wasn't just about Juke pulling the trigger and getting her first kill. There was an underlying theme of relationships. Chess games were definitely being played. Various chess moves were being made by various players on the board, and the relationships that these guys have, the ones that they're making and will make in the future, will definitely change the landscape of Season 4 going forward. So that's the underlying theme for this particular breakdown, for all things Raising Kanan, Season 4, Episode 4, The Way We Were. Now this episode kicks off with Traymon's return and him finally getting what he deserved ever since Season 2. The last time we saw Traymon was in Episode 210. Back in Season 2, Rock helped Traymon by dealing with Cartier, and she also helped Abraham with his gun charge with the help of a lawyer, Andre Barnes. However, in 210, when Rock and Marvin met Traymon and Abraham, they flipped the script. They made a deal with the Colombians, or rather made a deal with Juliana behind Rock's back. Fast forward to 403. Joaquin and Rock had a conversation around Traymon, and how he has a particular heroin supplier who may be looking to move into Queens. That's what they really wanted from Traymon. But as Marvin was here grabbing Traymon, the older Kane's narration in 404 told us how death is always near, but it doesn't run you. You either adapt to death's shadow or you end up being swallowed by it. It's less about fear, and more about what you do after the fear hits. It was classic Kanan Stark. He really doesn't sugarcoat things. You really do have to keep your nerve, despite the presence of death in the game that they're in. Because the fear of dying in this game is a death sentence in itself. It's just the rules of the game. Now with Traymon, we saw Marvin being classic Marvin, beating Traymon and also playing Russian roulette. As Rock arrived after her conversation with Joyce, which we are going to get to in just a moment, she told him she wanted his heroin connect, because we know Rock isn't looking to be supplied anymore, she wants to become the supplier. The 20% price increase, the chaos in Queens, the constant battles she is always having to deal with, it's a never-ending vicious cycle. Now after the Thomas family dinner, you can definitely tell this family has been through a lot. We briefly learned about Elijah Thomas through various conversations, different perspectives, and also how his death had a big impact on every single one of the Thomases in a different way. The only perspective we still haven't heard is Rock's, although after this conversation, you can definitely tell we are getting close. But Joyce also mentioned back in 401, she hadn't told the kids about her kidney cancer because she didn't want them making this about themselves, and she was right. Although this conversation definitely needed to be had. Joyce didn't want this because it was going to rip up a Pandora's box of trauma. She was trying to avoid something she's been burying for many years. But she came to the realization in 402, she couldn't hide. The box of trauma includes the choice Elijah made to commit suicide, not being able to deal with his death, and mainly abandonment, which forced a lot of maturity on these kids, especially Marvin. We learned all about how from Marvin's perspective, he had to step up and be a father figure to both Lou and Rock. Over on X/Twitter, I did write a very in-depth thread in terms of how it would have impacted him psychologically and how the burden and pressure probably pushed him into drug use. Now from Rock's perspective, she said she was the one who had to step up and deal with it. But all Rock wanted from Joyce after Elijah's death was her to be a mother, be strong, because she still had 3 kids. Now Joyce Thomas knows she's made mistakes, she's owning it. She even mentioned she did try to make things right. But when she did, the kids had already washed their hands of Joyce. So now that we're finally learning more in terms of why this relationship is the way it is, it makes a lot more sense, which is why I was saying we do have to be patient. And I'm definitely sure there's going to be a lot more that needs to be said, especially when it comes to Rock. Now with Kanan, we catch up with him over at his apartment, in conversation with OC. We got our answer pretty much early in episode 4, in terms of why Unique was here. Him being here earlier on in Kanan's apartment complex in 403, where he bumped into Crystal, it was definitely just a red herring. He was probably just scoping the place out, figuring out the lay of the land, where Kanan's apartment was, because all he wanted to do was rob Kanan's stash. That's why Crystal wanted him to move out the old apartment. Crystal is someone who is very intelligent. We've seen her advising Kanan before.
But business is about relationships, Kanan. You can't ever control the money coming in. You can only control what's going out.
As I mentioned in my breakdown for 401, having the right woman by your side really can help you elevate. But in comes Juke, where Kanan then left both to kind of sort shit out between them, because there is a lot of history here. Their rivalry dates back to mid-season 3 when they were a part of Butter. Crystal wanted to make sure she was the leader of the group, and she went as far as to having Jukebox jumped by 2 of her girls. Now we know Juke can definitely handle herself. She dealt with these 2 girls and still made it to practice even though she was battered and bruised, and she still made the lead. Their issue also stems from how Kanan treated Aisha and also jumped straight over to Crystal, and that really didn't sit too well with Juke either, especially because Aisha was a really nice girl. Jukebox warned Kanan from the jump, don't be messing around with Aisha because she really was a nice girl. But they never really circled back around to this relationship until 404. Crystal said she loves Kanan. She knows that Jukebox also means a hell of a lot to him, and if she is important to Kanan, then Juke is important to her. But I still maintain my stance in terms of what I think they're setting up with Crystal. It does seem like she's getting way too much screen time. She's definitely someone who I can see being taken off the chessboard in season 4. She's a very intelligent girl, who Kanan definitely cares for, even though he doesn't tend to listen to too much advice. But you can definitely see where they're going with this one. For me, it's just a question of when, how does it happen, and how will it affect Kanan? Will Rock be involved? Could Jukebox be involved? Definitely something to keep in mind. Now Kanan actually went to go see Snaps and Pop to pay them their share of the profits. In 402, they made it pretty clear they now own a part of Kanan's business after they invested heavily in his and Ronnie's enterprise. But first things first, Snaps and Pop are very well connected. They're seasoned gangsters, and you don't get into the position that they're in without having relationships like these. It goes back around to what Crystal mentioned back in 401. Business is all about relationships. As Pop mentioned, their business is built on relationships. It's all about who you know. But if you want people to see you for who you are, you have to let them know who you are. And this whole situation between Snaps, Pop and Kanan, we've spoken about this before in terms of how they just see Kanan as a revenue stream at first. It's nothing personal, it's just business. However, they do still want to have some kind of influence over Kanan. They definitely see a talented kid in Kanan, but someone who is still very raw, someone who's making mistakes. They want to mentor and nurture him, because I do feel they see him beyond kind of just profit. They know his loyalty to Rock is suspect at best, and I do think they are beginning to play on the fractured relationship with the Thomases, especially because Kanan wants to become his own man. He wants to be kind of separated from Rock, Marvin and Lou. Now they mentioned they can make a parlay happen with Quan, and Kanan was never going to turn down the invitation, because for as long as he was working for Rock, he was always going to be in her shadow. That's in essence why he wanted to come and see Quan, which was definitely pushed by Snaps and Pop. They are definitely kind of pushing Kanan along. Now he actually learned about the 20% price increase, which I don't know if Rock actually told Kanan, because it did look as if he was a little surprised. But either way, he mentioned there's no need to get Rock involved going forward. If they need to do business, Quan can go directly to Kanan, which I did think he liked the sound of. More so because we know Rock and Quan have a lot of tension. They definitely ain't getting on at this moment in time. And he's probably looking at Kanan thinking he's easier to control, easier to manage, and easier to deal with. We then saw him coming to meet Stefano, although not at his exotic fish store, but at his restaurant. And on that point, Stefano did once mention in season 3 that his store was bugged. We also learned in 402 law enforcement are watching him very closely. That's something we still need to keep in mind, because even the law enforcement's presence hasn't been quite heavy as previous seasons, when Detective Howard, Detective Burke and the task force were here. I'm sure they definitely will play a role at some point going forward. But with this meeting between Kanan and Stefano, the only reason why he agreed to meet Kanan was out of respect for Quan. He didn't actually appreciate Kanan coming around his mother's back. He made it pretty clear he works with Rock, not him. He also mentioned the fact that Rock came to see him in season 3 to borrow $500,000 to try and get Kanan back when he orchestrated this entire kidnapping in 310. But there are a lot of power moves beginning to take place, and we've seen something very similar from Kanan back in Power when he was going around Ghost and Tommy's back making deals with their Primeras, and also the move with Jason Michich. Mackay Curtis even teased before season 4, fans will get to see more of the Kanan that we saw in the original Power. It's insane, it's a chess game, everyone's playing, and Kanan certainly is playing the game. Now let's step away from the streets for a moment and get into the studio. Lou was here doing his thing with B-Rilla. He's back in the zone that we saw him in Season 2, when he was getting into Bulletproof Records, making music. This is what Lou's always wanted, to follow his father's footsteps. However, this is where Lou got his introduction to Imani Okoye. Before Season 4, she was described as a smart, confident, and a business-savvy executive at a boutique record label. She was here to amplify B-Rilla's presence in the market, but nobody ever gives you anything. You have to take it. That was Lou's advice to B-Rilla, which is something I posted on X not too long ago. I use the example of Raquel Thomas. She may not be the perfect role model, but the one thing we can all admire and take from Rock is her ambition, strength, determination, her ability to take what she wants, because in this world, nobody's going to give you anything. If you want something, you're going to have to take it, because if you don't, someone else definitely will. So that's just an example of how nobody's given anything to Rock, but how she's made the streets hers, which definitely also applies to real life. If you want something, you're definitely going to have to take it, because nobody's going to give you anything. Now a bit later on, Lou did meet with Imani Okoye in a meeting with Mr. Gelfand. Lou was under the impression that he had full independence, full control over the ship, from marketing, A&R, production, and so much more. This is where I normally would kind of say men in suits and ties always seem to be moving the goalposts, changing the terms and conditions. But from a business standpoint, and as a business owner myself, sometimes you do have to realize you really can't run everything yourself, especially when you're running a big corporation. As Snaps and Pop mentioned before, their business is built on relationships. Everything is built on relationships. There's a reason why some people are qualified to do certain things. You may be good at one thing, but we're definitely not experts at everything. So Lou definitely is going to give it a go with his partnership with Imani Okoye. They are going to be working together. At some point they are going to become really close, and let's see where their relationship goes after that. Now, one thing that Imani Okoye did mention in 404 was Famous. She mentioned that he's someone who became a big hit because of his music, but all of a sudden, he just vanished. Now, when Lou said he was just figuring his shit out, gathering his thoughts, Imani Okoye was very quick to question, so have you spoken to him? And I really do wonder, in the world of power, there are always CIs, confidential informants, and I just wonder whether Lou just needs to be very careful and watch his back around Imani. It's just a thought I do think we need to keep in mind, because we saw something very similar with Gerald in Season 3. He was always asking similar questions to Marvin, so it is just something we may need to keep an eye on. Now, while we're on the topic of Famous, we did also see Kanan coming to see Lou later on. They actually spoke a little about Famous, where Lou asked him the question whether he'd heard anything from Famous, but nobody's heard a thing. It's like he's a complete ghost at this moment in time, although Lou did have some new information. He spoke to Jessica. He definitely isn't out in LA, otherwise she would have told him, so we can now cross that off the list, which only leaves a few options. Is he hiding somewhere? Could he potentially maybe be in witness protection? Or, what I still think is the most likely outcome for Famous is that he's already been killed, potentially by Marvin during the time period that passed between 310 and 402, which was around 2 months. Either way, as the episodes pass by, we are getting closer and closer to finding out the truth, that's for sure. Now with Unique, we catch up with him with Early Tyler. The king is back and he's ready to take back what's his. He wants to take over and take Rock's operation, and he's ready to lose his persona as a ghost in the shadows. However, this is where Marvin came looking for Early Tyler, and he thought, now's probably not the right time. But with Marvin, he was here with a proposal, a thank you for using his link, which was his aunt, who helped Marvin reconnect with Gerald's daughter, Amber. His proposal was to take the operation in Corona, because Marvin went and got rid of Stefano's highest earners. We then saw them having this meeting a bit later on at the Italian restaurant, where they went through the formalities, and now this business partnership was good to go. Early Tyler is going to be running Stefano's spot out in Corona, which he mentioned has been in his family for a very long time. However, this was Marvin's recommendation. Any mistakes, any issues with Early Tyler, then Stefano is going to be looking in Marvin's direction, and that's a huge problem. I really do feel like Marvin is just digging himself a big hole at this moment in time, because I don't like the fact that Stefano mentioned this is a business that has been in his family for a while. We know Unique's looking to take over, and we know he's also somewhat, not friends with Unique, but kind of helping him stay under the radar, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is a business that ends up under Unique's hands. Early Tyler backstabbing Marvin and Stefano, where Unique takes advantage because of this relationship with Early Tyler. Again, we go back to how relationships are really important. Can Marvin really trust Early Tyler? Definitely not, and it really is going to backfire on Marvin. He really is making mistakes and bad choices after bad choices every single episode in Season 4. So let's see what happens here, because I'm sure I'm not the only one with a gut feeling. Something definitely is going to go wrong with Marvin and the Italians. Now, speaking of Unique making moves, We saw him coming to visit someone we haven't seen since season 2, Damon. Damon used to work for Rock. He was set to take over this New Jersey operation when she was looking to expand. But when everything went down with Sal Baselli, Unique made a few chess moves himself. He then found himself muscling his way into Rock's organization and actually taking this operation. And that didn't sit too well with Damon. He walked out and that was that. We hadn't seen him since 206. But both of them had something in common. They were both dead to Rock. Unique also needed an extra pair of hands for his next mission, because at this moment in time, he's been making moves on his own. He got rid of Rock's lawyer in 402, and then Richard and Sonny at the beginning of 403, which happened to be in the same evening. But for this next hit, and going forward, he needs a crew. Now, hitting Rock's transportation side of the business, which is run by David and Jerry, is something we already saw in the official trailer for episode 4. It was just a matter of when and who Unique was with. But they came in all guns blazing, lit the place up, caused absolutely chaos and mayhem, and in the mayhem, Damon actually went down, with Unique just about managing to escape. It really was a messy kind of hit when you kind of think about it. It really wasn't planned well at all. There was no strategy, no discipline, it was just guns and bullets, shoot anyone on sight, create absolute chaos. So it really was a messy hit. Now this is the last thing that Rock needed. First Andre, which at this moment in time she had no idea. We will get to law enforcement and Rock a bit later on, but first Andre and then the Chinese restaurant. She's also trying to make her own moves in terms of becoming the Connect, where she met with an Afghan who goes by the name Issa. She's trying to level up and get into business with those who are at a higher level, and you can see why. I'm sure she's fed up of dealing with all this chaos and commotion with her operations. There are constant variables, too much chaos, too much unpredictability. Why not get yourself in a position where you're in a big mansion, where everybody reports to you, but where you stop taking the risk, where you're away from all of this mess, where you only work for 2 days of the year.
Esta situación. Tú puedes tener tu propio cartel, ¿me entiendes? ¿Mm?
Sí.
Te mudas al campo, te pasas los días pintando acuarela y deja que ellos tomen todo el riesgo. Trabajas 2, 3 veces al año.
That's what she discussed with Symphony back in season 1, very similar to what Felipe Lobos told Ghost in Power. She wanted to set the operation to a point where she could just sit back, hand it over to Lou, where all she does is collect the checks. Things like this, it definitely is starting to become a headache. Now, she actually learned one of the bodies that dropped was Damon. However, Terry and Jerry did mention one did get away. Marvin's been asking around, but nobody's talking in the streets, because nobody actually knows anything apart from Early Tyler. But I do think she is going to find out pretty soon. Based on history, episode 5 is normally when there is a big reveal, and it is going to be real interesting when she comes face to face with someone who she thought was dead. We also Ghost's reaction when Kanan popped up behind him in season 4. It really did look like he saw a ghost. However, the situation between Unique and Rock is even more complex, and that's because of Rock's pregnancy in 401. That's not something the writers threw in for the sake of it. Patina Miller has teased she will feel remorse, and it will play a part later on in season 4, so it will be interesting to see whether Rock and Unique have this conversation. But moving with Rock, she turned up at the Afghan's restaurant the following day, where she was taken out the back, but where she was very skeptical stepping into this car. As I mentioned before, this game is way too unpredictable, and who knows whether it could have been a setup, who knows who could have been in this car with her, and who knows whether they could have taken her. But Rock is a risk taker, no risk, no reward, and luckily it wasn't a setup. She did actually meet the main man in charge. Now Rock made her proposal. However, if he agreed to do business with Rock, it meant that he'd have to find a new source, hire more workers, and he warned that he only wants to work with people who are serious. He did find it an interesting proposal, and he said he'll be in touch. But I do wonder how Rock is going to manage all of this when Unique's looking to come to take her crown. If you're making promises to the Afghans who are going to supply you with a hell of a lot of heroin, you better be able to deliver, especially because he did mention he has to make all the arrangement to get extra workers, a new source, probably put more systems in place. If Rock hasn't got a shit in order, and Unique has, then maybe he can also make a proposition to the Afghans a bit later on. I still stand by my prediction, come the end of season 4, Unique is going to be the big winner. He hasn't had many wins in Raising Kanan, if any, but this season, I definitely do think that changes. Now speaking of Unique, he came to pay Mrs. Baselli a visit out in New Jersey. Unique mentioned that they had a common enemy because of who was behind not just Sal Baselli's death, but also her son, Marco Baselli. A hit that was arranged by Marvin which went sideways, and then Marvin actually got rid of Sal Baselli in 302. Now Teresa isn't someone who got involved in Sal's business, however, she did have a contact for Unique. She handed him a piece of paper with details, and I think we're finally going to get our introduction to New Jersey's new crime boss, Phil Russo. That's the contact I'm sure Teresa gave Unique, as he promised to make their enemies pay. The fact that he was also looking on at the fire was quite symbolic, because he's been saying he's fire all season long. He's been burning things down to the ground, and he's going to continue to do so. Now, just before we get into arguably the moment of the episode with Juke's first kill, Rock did have a couple of visitors. Detective O'Leary and Detective Walton came to question Rock about Andre Barnes, because she was the last person who saw him, and this is where she finally learned about his death. Rock had nothing to do with Andre's death, of course, but the fact that law enforcement are aware of who Rock is, how she's been on their radar before, it does kind of look very suspicious even though Rock had nothing to do with his death. And she definitely knows. She's lost a major chess piece on her board. Andre was like a rook. A rook is a really important piece, and now that he's gone, she's gone and lost her connection within law enforcement. He was the man with all the connections, the possible deal that Rock would have taken if shit ever hit the fan. Piece by piece, Unique is starting to isolate her, and he's going to continue to do so. So let's see how she reacts, because relationships with law enforcement, as we saw with Snaps and Pop, they're very important. I do think going forward, she's going to have to dig deep into her pockets, just to make sure she stays one step ahead. But let's move on to all things Jukebox. Now we saw Jukebox with her new friends that she made back in 403, enjoying herself, trying to be different, trying to be herself, but not going back to her old ways which were trying to tempt her back in 403, who were Twin Low and the crew that she used to boost clothes with back in season 1. There was also someone who went by the name Jackie who took a real liking to Juke, and we are going to see them hit it off at some point in season 4. They're just planting the seeds. This is someone who Juke will be getting close with. However, just like I asked a question like Imani Okoye, honestly after Gerald I think I have trust issues now for the rest of Raising Kanan. I think everyone should always be on guard. But I just can't help but wonder if there is a twist coming with a particular relationship. Whether it's with Lou, whether it's with Jukebox, let's wait and see. Now as Juke and Mara were walking away from the bar, this is where we found that Mara was actually married. She was having trouble at home, and she mentioned her family was a mess, and it definitely stemmed from what I assume could potentially be abuse at home. But in all the commotion, Juke was knocked to the ground, where she was scuffed up pretty bad. It was a bad fall, so when she was at home putting an ice pack on her bruises, Marvin had every single right to question who put her hands on her, and his silence definitely spoke volumes. There was no way Marvin was going to stand for anyone putting hands on Juke. Marvin and Juke have definitely been through their shit. They've been through major ups and downs, and they even also got into a physical altercation back in season 1. This is a new and transformed Marvin. He may be making some reckless mistakes with Early Tyler and Stefano, but he really is trying to be a good father to Juke, and I think Marvin is every father. If someone put hands on their daughter, put yourself in Marvin's shoes. I'm sure some of you listening may even have a daughter. Imagine the rage if someone put hands on your girl. Now Marvin wasted no time. He actually left his piece in the car at the request of Juke, which kinda backfired in the end. Marvin went over to the apartment without his piece, and he did what he does best. It was only when he had his back turned when he was about to leave, Mara's husband attacked him from behind with a blade of some sort, which does show Marvin is human. He can get caught, just like Unique did when he turned his back. But in this moment, in this little scuffle, Marvin really had his back against the wall, and I think we all knew what was coming next. Jukebox came to save the day, where she went and got her first kill to save Marvin. They both left in a hurry, and with all the adrenaline, Juke really didn't have too much to say. I think once everything kinda calms down, once she has time to reflect, we are going to see how she reacts, although I don't think she's going to have the same reaction as Famous did. I think Kanan's narration gives us a good idea of her thought process. He reflected on how this world chews people up, but there are a few rare ones like Jukebox that turn death into armor. They wear it like a badge. The mirror. When Juke looks in the mirror, she's going to see herself, and she's going to start to like what she sees. His warning is pretty clear. Jukebox is a half victim, half killer, not knowing or aware that she's already half dead. So going forward, I think we're going to see a real different side to Juke. This person that was trying to be different, this person that was trying to change, any sort of innocence that was left is slowly going to start to disappear.